Hello, I'm Charles Feldman.
And my name is Ela Edgar. And we're here for another episode of Trust on Purpose.
Yes. We're actually going to revisit a topic that we did an episode on about maybe a year ago or more, which is self-trust. And we're revisiting it in part because, at least for me, it's been a topic that's been up for me lately. What areas of my life do I trust myself in? And what areas are there places in my life where I don't trust myself so strongly? And what's that about? And what's important about that? So the obvious one in Ela's and my conversation before this conversation started, one of the things that came up for me is trusting my memory, which seems to be not as clear and strong as it used to be. I forget things. People will say that something like, "Hey, do you remember what?" No, I don't remember that. What? Tell me what happened. Not that I'm losing it as in, I need to go to a memory care unit, but there seem to be more instances where my memory isn't as good as I remember it being. Ooh, isn't that interesting?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I remember my memory being better than it is now. But kind of along those lines, one of the self-trust issues that comes up for me is how I deal with and how can I trust myself to deal with that effectively? Do I need to do something differently in order to say, yeah, I actually do trust myself around recovering when I, for example, and we've all done this, forget somebody's name that we know well, that we absolutely should know this person's name, but it's not coming to the tip of our tongue in the moment. And so how do we recover from that? Do I trust myself to recover from that? But also those moments when literally somebody describes an incident or a situation or an experience that I was part of, but I don't remember that much about it. I don't remember what the other person remembers about it. So that's kind of brought me into this question of self-trust.
Mm-hmm.
And do I trust myself to be able to manage, to be competent to manage in those situations? There are other instances also where I think my assessment is that I have not shown up in a way that I'd like to show up. So I'm questioning how well I trust my competence to, for example, have a conversation with a prospective client to the point where I actually land the client as opposed to having them go look for someone else. Again, self-trust shows up there. Has this been happening more? I don't know. I haven't actually kind of looked at the data of the number of conversations I've had that have ended in work versus conversations that ended in either, no, I'm going to continue looking for someone else, or just be ghosted. So anyway, what comes up for you, Ela?
Like there's a whole bunch of stuff here. And transparently, I had to take some notes so that I could remember all of the things.
Oh, good. Good.
Just saying, my little notebook is right here. So this is a really interesting perspective that you're opening and sharing today. And the conversation before the conversation, as we were talking about, memory as one thing,
Yes, it.
and the amount of information, data, input that we navigate today versus 10 years ago versus 20 years ago. So while, yes, you and I are both aging in number,
Yeah.
we think about what all of us are consuming every single day. There's no possible way that we could remember everything. There's no way. And so part of it for me is we think about memory in particular. So one of the things that I do to turn my brain off is I will find, I'm full disclosure here, I love Netflix shows that talk about serial killers, most deranged, not like gore, but I love the psychology behind, the human behavior behind. So I hopped on the sofa last night to watch an episode. I thought I was watching the last episode of the Jeffrey Dahmer series. I think about 7 minutes into it and realized I've already watched it.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Been there.
And that this is not the first time that's happened. So I say that also that I give myself permission that there are things I don't need to remember. So whatever happened in a Netflix episode or in a fiction book that I'm reading, I don't have to remember it. But how do I take care of the things that are important for me to remember? And so then have some systems or processes in place.
Yeah.
And note taking is one of them. And the plus also that I would add is I'm also learning more and more that the things that I need to remember, I will. And that's like I say that out loud and I can feel like I'm holding my breath. So if I have a few clients that I work with right now, we're in sizable projects. There's some big thinking required. And the pressure could be that I have to remember every single detail of every single conversation in order to keep all the dots connected. And then part of me just goes, bullshit. No, you don't. Because that expectation we put on ourselves, that's staggering. And I think, ooh, this is interesting. What comes up for me is, and I'm thinking of one client in particular that actually both of them, that we're in a co design. And so for me to take the body, the thinking, the ownership of I have to know it all or keep track of everything, how does that impact how I show up as we co design?
Yeah.
And what's the unintended consequence to my clients if that's how I show up? Ooh, I didn't know where that came from.
Very interesting though, and I get it because I've been there too. It's all my responsibility, and when I am living out that assessment, 2 things happen. One is that I do still forget stuff, right? But then I get really upset at myself for forgetting stuff because I'm supposed to remember all that, just like you said. So I lose connection with the person I'm talking with because I have an interior conversation going on about how I'm failing to do what I need to be doing. So
Yeah.
one of the ways that I manage that or handle that is to have a conversation with the client before beginning any kind of work like that and say, let's talk about who's responsible for what pieces of this. And then also, as we get into it and find out that there's pieces that, gee, am I responsible? Is that, I don't know, question. Then again, having that conversation and saying, wait a minute, here we are with this piece, and I don't know who's supposed to be responsible. What do you think? Let's talk about that. That's great, and then I still find myself sometimes in that space of the assessment and the emotions that go with that and the body that goes with that, where I'm supposed to be doing everything. Interestingly, if I'm in front of the room with a bunch of people and somebody I don't think about, for example, saying, "Hey," if I'm the only person in the front of the room with a team, or not front of the room, but in working with a team and there's something to be put on a flip chart, I don't think about saying, "Hey, can I get a volunteer? Come up and write some stuff down on a flip chart while I continue this conversation or lead this conversation." And so I put that on myself that I should be doing everything. And again, I can't do it all. So I end up not being as available as a facilitator as I would like to be, as I intend to be. So do I trust myself to remember to do that and to actually take responsibility for what's mine and not take responsibility for what someone else's and make requests?
Yeah. I'm looking at, and you've seen this heart because it sits on my desk literally. This is my purple and pink and orange knitted little heart that's stuffed. And this is on my desk every day as a reminder that we are humans in a human experience. And as I probably don't remember this every day, but it is a regular reminder that none of us know everything about everything and we're not supposed to. That really where the impact of our work, our relationships, the things that matter to us come from our willingness to be human, to be vulnerable, to admit not knowing, especially, I'm giggling a little bit, when we're supposed to be the experts in the room. That actually, that's probably even more vulnerable to be standing working with a group to say, I actually don't know, or I've never thought of it from that perspective. I really love that you brought that into our conversation. Really appreciate the courage for you to bring that and what happens when we do that. And so, is that self trust?
Yeah,
What is that?
that's it is self-trust. I think it's trusting that being honest, authentically who I am, and declaring that to other people is okay. Interestingly, part of that, I think for me, part of that journey to being able to do that and feeling okay, trusting myself that I'm going to be okay doing that, and so is my client, is that if there are people, individuals that I do that with, and they are not comfortable with me being transparent, with me saying, I don't know that, or that's something that I've never thought about. That's great. I love it. Or whatever it is, I need to think about this for a little bit. This is a new idea for me. If they're not comfortable with it, that's not my fault. It's not my problem
Right.
to take care of their discomfort in the face of that. I could, I can offer them something. See, this is really interesting. I'm thinking about this because I listened to my statement. It's not my job to take care of them, and it is also. So negotiating that one, how do I care about and demonstrate that I care about someone who's distressed about my acknowledgement that I don't know something that they maybe think that I should know? What is my responsibility there? And can I trust myself to step into that?
Well, this is so fascinating. I had a recent conversation with Dan Newby,
Mhm.
author of The Field Guide to Emotions and many other. He talked about an event in New Mexico a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how he wanted to be able to create opportunities for people to feel different emotions. And so if you're sitting in one of these sessions and you're feeling the emotion of boredom that there's nothing here for me, great. Like his intention wasn't to create this like, oh my god, everything was fantastic. The intention was rather, what can I invite you to feel or experience that might be different than what you normally experience? And so thinking about that perspective from how do you share or how do you show care for someone who may be in distress about your lack of knowledge or your inability to answer a particular question or whatever that might be, what if actually allowing them to feel that distress was part of their experience,
Yeah,
part of their
yeah,
learning? So not we're not washing our hands. Oh gosh, well, off you go, take care of that, or pushing the box of tissue across the table because, clean up your tears. We don't want to see that. Not that at all, but rather, how can I be with you
yeah,
so that you can feel whatever it is that you're feeling and not be alone? So I think that would be a huge part of care. And the part of self care, self trust, is that this isn't mine to shoulder for you, but I can walk alongside with you.
yeah. I love that last little bit of that. I can walk alongside with you, even through the depths. I will be there with you alongside you. So another thing that comes up for me around self-trust is doubt, self-doubt, in the sense that when I doubt my capacity to do something. So that in a sense, I'm saying if I doubt myself, my capacity to do something, I'm saying I don't really fully trust my capacity to do something, whatever that might be. So there's the one side of that is, oh, well, I just blow it off and say, okay, look, I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. The other side of that is to kind of pull back and not gauge, not put myself into the situation because my self-doubt is showing up, right? My lack of trust in my capacity to do it, whatever that is, competence or maybe my inability to demonstrate care in a way that the other person might perceive it for what it is, or however that might be showing up. This is another area of self trust that, again, has, like I said at the beginning, self trust is up for me. And this is another one of those areas. How do I deal with that? Those times when I doubt or I distrust my ability to do something. And the question is it fear that's talking? Or is there really some good reason for me to distrust my ability to do this? And where do I go with this in that moment or over time? When fear shows up, it's strong, it's pervasive. It keeps popping back up. So part of it for me, part of self-trust, I think, is making friends with that fear, kind of acknowledging it, first of all, and acknowledging it for what it is. Where does it come from? What's its roots?
Mm.
Taking the time and effort to really inquire into that fear and see where it's coming from so that I recognize whether it's that self doubt is valid. I should, in fact, doubt myself here and then go from there. What do I do about it? Or whether that self doubt is simply a product of my being afraid of something. I'm curious what your thought on that is.
Oh, there's a lot here. So I also regularly pay attention to my itty bitty shitty committee.
Yes.
And so I know and I love Shirzad Shamin's book, Positive Intelligence and the research behind it. But number one of those saboteurs for all of us is judge. We judge self, we judge others, we judge situations. And I think even Brene Brown talks about this in some of her research about in the absence of data, we make up story, right? That itty bitty committee goes wild. So, number one, paying attention to what that inner dialogue is. Number two, looking for the data. So, is there something to be fearful about? And if there is, great, let's pay attention to that. Or maybe there is something, but I can mitigate it, or I can ask for help, or I can a myriad of different options that can happen. I think the other thing, and this definitely shows up for me lately, again, with a couple of clients that I'm working with. And these are not, I want to just preface this is not one on one coaching. And this actually isn't even group coaching. It's a little bit different scope. So, one of them, I actually said to the CEO, like, I'm terrified that I'm going to let you down. What you're asking me to do is outside of my scope and my area of expertise. And so I don't want to let you down. And he was so gracious. And so he said, but Ela, what we do have is years of working with you and we trust you. And so he says, it's okay that this isn't your area of expertise or where you do your, most of your work. The trust that we have in you is what's going to carry us forward.
Mm.
And the other client, like, we've never done work this way together. And what we're trying to accomplish, there is no rule book, there is no guidebook, there is no like 7-step program. We're flying the airplane while we're building it. And so there absolutely is, mm, maybe it's not fear. Maybe it's not fear. And this is, I think, where emotional literacy is really important to be able to identify. And oh, shoot, I think it was Susan David, Emotional Agility, who talked about being able to name it for ourselves. So just because we feel those butterflies in our stomach doesn't mean that's automatically nervousness or fear. And so, what is it that we're feeling? And in both these situations that I've just shared, I don't know that it's fear. I think part of it is uncertainty. There's a dose of excitement because I really love shiny and new. I love trying things that I've never tried before. And the third one, there's a, I'm like, like, what's the third one? Charles, look inside my brain. Actually, no, look in my body. Anticipation, maybe. Like, how could this turn out? What could be possible? And if we don't try, we don't know. Okay, I'm just going to pause there because I need to breathe for a minute.
Yeah.
What has that got you thinking about?
Oh, in terms of self-trust, one of the things listening to you, one of the things that speaks to me is this notion of trusting. I don't have this book right here. Darn it. It's in the other room. Again, Adam Grant's book, Think Again, where he talks about the less sometimes people know about something, or the less competent they are, the more confident they are in their ability to do it. And so they tend to, they tend to come off as very confident, and when in fact they don't really have the skills, expertise, knowledge. But what I'm hearing in you and what you're saying is, you know what? I don't know. This is not it's not my wheelhouse. And with the support and trust of my client, I'm willing to try something different. I trust myself to go into this with my eyes open that I don't know. This is not something that I'm really strong in. And I've shared that with my client. And there's clear expectations around what I can and what I can do. And there's a what's possible here. There's something potentially really powerful and really positive in the possible column. So I trust that I can at least move in that direction and something of value will come out of it, which is different than the kind of hubris that can come with overconfidence, as Adam Grant talks about in his book, and others have as well. In fact, that particular relationship between overconfidence and undercompetence is something that's other people have done a lot of research on. Trusting yourself to bring what you have, everything that you have, to the table. Yeah. And that in doing so, something of value will happen. And that it's not, especially since you've been very clear with your client, that your role is not to be the total expert in this. In fact, your role is not to be the expert at all, but really more the convener, the person asking, really exploring, the lead explorer, that whatever shows up, you'll be able to help your client and work with your client to create value.
And there are also clients and or situations that I would decline.
Yeah.
So I think really being clear, I did some soul searching before I said I would even entertain a conversation. And so coming back to that self trust and the other, again, in the conversation before the conversation, the connectedness, the deeper listening about self trust and our inner wisdom or that intuition.
Yeah.
And how do we lean more into that? That our all of our knowing, I'm pointing to my cute little forehead, that all of our knowing, whether it's competency based or whatever, doesn't only come from our logical thinking in our prefrontal cortex. And we did that episode recently about listening to our intuition. How does that help support building a stronger sense of self trust with ourselves?
A great question. And I think it's my first reaction or my first response is that it's a big part of building self-trust is listening to being able to listen to our intuition and really checking it out. I mean, not assuming our intuition is 100, because there's been a lot of research that shows that, people's intuitions, whatever those might be, are not always reliable. So how do you check that out? And taking the time and care to check out, is this intuition really something I should listen to? Is it telling me something important about myself, about the situation, about other people in the situation? And so should I really listen and take it into account? Or is this intuition really, and we talked about this a little bit again, is this intuition, kind of going back to the idea of fear, is it really just fear showing up in the guise of intuition, in the guise of some information that I really should pay attention to? So I think that really here, what's important in terms of self-trust and building self-trust is to check it out, to not just A, assume it's accurate, 100% accurate, B, not assume that it's just not worth paying attention to and move on without it. That intuition is an important part of trusting ourselves or listening to our intuition. and checking our intuitions out, kind of grounding them, as we say, in whatever data, information, experience we can.
I really feel that building that muscle of checking it out, listening to our intuition, looking for data points, pausing and having some time for self-reflection, like truly deeply listening. And I was with a group of emerging leaders with a particular client this week, and we were talking about receiving feedback and how difficult that can be, which is true. And as we're talking about this, it was really interesting because a number of the participants and how they were sharing, they're committed to being right, that they've already got this all figured out, this whole receiving feedback thing. Here's how I do it, and here's what happens. And so I really encourage, not just in receiving feedback, but in this topic of self trust, the rigor, the discipline to check ourselves, to check in, to look for the data. What is actually going on here? Where can I trust? Especially when we're so committed to being right or maybe wrong. Is there a space for us to consider something different? Is there a space for us to consider something different? Whether we act on it or not, developing that rigor and that consistency about checking in. Is there something else here?
Yeah. I really appreciate that you added the committed to being wrong, because that can be just as debilitating or damaging as commitment to being right. Oh, I'm wrong. Yeah. And you fall down into a pit of despair. But I think the important part here you just said, just leave it there, because you said it very well. And I think maybe this is a good place to wrap this conversation, because we've talked about trusting our memory and how really part of the data there is that we've got way too much stuff to try and remember. And that if we fail to do so now and then, it's kind of like, yeah, it's okay.
It's okay.
But also, we've gone into the whole notion of self trust around intuition and our ability to do or not do something, and how we can navigate that, particularly through the process of saying, look, I don't think I can do this, but I want to have the conversation with my client or with my friend or with my family member, whatever it is, and become clear about what the expectations are around that, so that both or all parties are working with the same set of expectations.
Mhm.
And then finally, really interrogating or inquiring into our intuition, listening to it, not rejecting it, not ignoring it on the one hand, but also not taking it as the only source of information and data as we move forward in life. All three of those are powerful for building that sense of self trust. Thank you. This has been a good
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Thank you too. On behalf of both Charles and myself, we want to say a big thank you to our producer and sound editor, Chad Penner, Hillary Rideout of Inside Out Branding, who does our promotion, our amazing graphics, and marketing for us. And our theme music was composed by Jonas Smith. If you have any questions or comments for us about the podcast, if you have a trust related situation that you'd like us to take up in one of our episodes, we'd love to hear from you at trust@trustonpurpose.org.
And we'd also like to thank you, our listeners. Take care and keep building trust on purpose. Until next time.
Until next time.